In this tutorial, I will show you how to use CSV Spreadsheets to create an animation in Cavalry. So I have this animation set up and I'm using CSV spreadsheet data to populate text inside Cavalry, and then I'm animating it with a frame modifier. Make sure to download free project file below if you get lost and something is not clear. So I've got this spreadsheet with names of cities in Greece, and it has about 49 lines. 48 if you subtract the header column of city and country. So how can we use this inside Cavalry to generate a text animation? So simply, if you import a spreadsheet into Cavalry, you can see the preview on the cursor like this. And what we need to do is basically take this data and combine it to create a text string like so. And I'll show you how to do it. So I'm using Cavalry version 2.3 just in case things are not working 100% for you. So first of all, I'm going to import a spreadsheet into the composition. And this is how it looks in the attribute editor. You have basically the file name, and we can see the titles of the columns. So the column title corresponds to the titles in the CSV Excel file. If we add something here and save the file, go back to Cavalry, and then in Assets panel, if I just reload it, then I should be able to see a third column. So I'm going to rename this layer as cities, keep things organized, duplicate it, and rename it as countries. Okay, so the way the spreadsheets in Cavalry work is simply you can select data which you want to use by the column. So in this case, we're going to use city. You can remap it to color range, to number range, area, and so on, but we're just going to leave it as it is. You can factorize it, which means it will turn all the data into a scale from 0 to 1. You can check the fixed row, which means that you can use a specific row to output a specific point of data in your spreadsheet. For example, if I want to output only the row 11, I can do this. You can offset it and use every other row, and so on and so on. And it gives you a nice count of how many rows you have. So for example, you have 48 total. I'm going to create a text layer, and then simply you can plug this data into the string, and you have a new city name. So if I check the fixed row and then cycle through it, we can change which city is displayed based on the row index. In this spreadsheet, I have two columns. I have names of the cities and names of the countries where the cities are located. Now, I would like to combine the city names with the country that are located. So to do this in Cavalry, we simply have to right-click on the string, go to Utilities, find the string generator. String generator is a tool that can allow us to create strings and basically format them in specific ways and so on. What I'm interested in is formatted string. Formatted string allows us to create a specific string and we can set up rules for it. So if I click add over here, I can add another index. And let's rename the first one to city, and the second one to country. So if I grab the cities layer and drag it on top of the city, and the countries layer, drag it on top of the country, and make sure in the country spreadsheet, I select the country column title, and now we can format it. The way you format it is simply like you would format any text. So by using the curly brackets, you can recall an index, and by adding extra signs, extra type in between, the Cavalry will populate it. And for example, we can add something like this. So as you can see, you can add words, you can add numbers and so on, exclamation points, and the Cavalry will populate this string with the text you specify plus any other text or values that are coming into the string generator in those two indexes. And you can add like prefixes, like, like numbers and so on, and suffixes. And this whole thing will just create a specifically formatted string for you. So this is super useful if you want to create lots of data and you want to have certain things repeated over and over and then dynamically being replaced by, like, for example, a spreadsheet. So I'm just going to delete all of this and just leave it like so. So we have our city name with a country that is located in. If I put this into a duplicator, you can see how everything is nicely duplicated over and over, and the cities and countries are being updated dynamically. Now, if I keep increasing the number of copies in our duplicator, you will see that we are ending up with empty fields. We are only having the commas being populated from our string array. If I add like an exclamation point, you can see the exclamation point is repeated on top. But we are not getting any of the data from the spreadsheet. This is because I only have 49 rows in the spreadsheet, which is actually 48 points of data if you subtract the top title. So what is happening is that Duplicator is trying to populate the shapes with, well, data that doesn't exist anywhere. So what we need to do is basically figure out a way to actually wrap around the data in a spreadsheet. So once it reaches the endpoint, the 48th row, it should start from the top. So there's a way to do this in Cavalry with some math. Special thanks go to Chris, who's one of the creators of Cavalry, and Remco, who's the creator of Scenery, who helped me came up with the solution for this problem. So the solution to this problem is if we simply click on the fixed row in our spreadsheet, then as you can see, we are populating every single duplicator copy with data from the spreadsheet. The next step is to add a math node to the row index. And what we need to do is basically auto-advance the row index from the spreadsheet to populate it with a copy of the data. And once we reach the end of the spreadsheet, which is this point, to go back to the top. So we have our math node. We are going to use Modulo's formula. Select Duplicator, go to Advanced, find the index context and drop it in the first field of the math node. And then click here on your spreadsheet and find the row count and then drop it on the second field. And as you can see, we are simply populating every copy in a duplicator from the data from the spreadsheet. And once we reach the end, we are start to repeat the list again. So let's do the same thing for the countries as well. Select fixed row, row index, right click, add math node, select modules operation, then duplicator, take the index context, drop it on the first operation, go back to the country spreadsheet and grab the row count and drop it in the second field. And as you can see, if I keep increasing number of copies, we are still populating every single copy with correct data. So to explain what is happening, you just have to look up the modulus operation in a math. And what does it mean is one number is divided by the other. And then once it reaches the end of the list, it goes back to the beginning. So this means in this context, we are simply using the index of number of copies and we are dividing it by the total row count. So once we make 48 copies, then the next copy goes back to the very first value in our spreadsheet. Hopefully this makes a little bit sense, but if you look up on Wikipedia or on the internet, you should be able to get a better idea how the modulus function formula works. So the most complex thing is done. What I need to do now is simply change the duplicator into circle, then increase number of copies. And as you can see, we are simply making extra and extra copies once we reach the end of the list. Going to expand the radius. Now what we can do to style this, we can change the alignment to basically for the left. Going to rename duplicator to citizen circle. To clean this up, I'm going to put this in a group. Next, I need to add some color. I'm going to use color array. I'm going to use these colors. Next, I need background shape. And simply, if I drag and drop this color on top of the background shape, then we have a nice background. Then I'm going to drag and drop this color onto text itself. So next thing I want to do is basically create a setup where we can push away text layers from the center of our duplicator and change the color and change the font size and change the thickness and so on. So let's start with one thing at a time. To push away specific layers, we can do something like, for example, value. So if I increase, let's say, this setup to like 75%, so if we add a falloff and if I move it, then as you can see, I can move the text shapes without a problem. However, they are a little bit problematic to control because we are actually pushing everything 75 pixels right and up because we are targeting X and Y at the same time. So this is not the best way to do it. The way to do this is to actually use getVector modifier. So the getVector modifier simply returns direction from one point to another. So if I create a null and put that null inside the target, check off the optimize and then dial this down, then as you can see, everything gets pushed away from this null equally. So if I'm closer to this wall, this one gets pushed away further. And if I move it to the other side, then shape gets pushed towards the right more severely than this part. So if I just zero this out, if I put the null as a child of duplicator, then we can move everything together. Going to rename it as position vector. Now I'm going to use the strength field to control the strength of the whole getVector effect. And if I add a value modifier to the strength, then I can easily control this effect from the value itself. And if I add a falloff, then I can have localized getVector effect no matter which side of the circle we are. Next step is to change it to rectangle, make it really long, maybe like around 20 points. And if I simply zero out the position of the falloff and make it a child of the getVector, then if we take the radius of our duplicator and then put it into our falloff position X, and if I take radius again and put it into the rectangle X, then our falloff will be responsive to the radius of our circle itself. Now the best part about having falloff as a child of the position vector null is that I can easily rotate the null itself, the position vector, and the follow will basically follow perfectly. If I change the angle of my null to 35 degrees, then we have a falloff pointing at 35 degrees. So as a next step, I'm going to apply some procedural font styling to this setup. So what I need is look for typeface and typeface array. And for the typeface, I'm going to use regular and bold one. And you can pick any font you want. I'm going to go with Montserrat. and Montserrat, but extra bold. So if I select my typeface, simply drag and drop in here, make them as a child to the typeface array to clean this up, and we can put the typeface as a child of the text itself. And now if I drag the typeface array onto the typeface field, as you can see, everything is changed accordingly to the array itself. So we have bold, regular, bold, regular. And the best part is that we can change everything from this one field. So I'm going to leave it as an extra bold italic. And if we go back to the typeface array and check index, click on index and add a value, then we can specify where the bold and regular change happens. So what we need to do is simply specify I want to use typeface 1, just here. So everything is now bold and italic, but I want to use this falloff to limit where the change happens. So now, if I select my falloff and make it slightly bigger, then as you can see, we are only changing one city name to bold while everything else stays regular. As the next step, I want to change font size when we swap from one word to another. So if I go to main text layer, right click on font size and find value blend, then this value will let us change the font size and blend between two values. So if I specify something like 20 and maybe 40, and if I use the same falloff as before, then as you can see, we are affecting not only the font weight, but the size of our text, and it's very targeted because of this falloff. So if I select my duplicator, right click on a travel and add frame modifier. If I press play, then this is a little bit too fast, so we can change the speed of it by changing the value, the initial value that the whole thing is multiplied by or advanced by frame. So as you can see, this is a little bit better. Okay, next what I want to target is actual color of the layer itself. So this is a little bit more tricky, but we can do this with Duplicator and by adding submesh. And submesh will let us target specific items in our duplicator. So if I click replace fill, then as you can see, everything gets replaced. So what we need to do is simply add color array to the fill and specify two colors. And as you can see, we are targeting every other letter. This is due to the fact that the submesh has the custom level range, and this specifies how any changes are, how they are affecting the underlying meshes. So if we change these levels, then things will be affected differently. And to find out which levels you want to use, we have a tool called Mesh Explorer. Plug it to the side. Mesh Explorer lets us find out how the mesh is structured. So if I select our main text, you can see how the whole thing is structured. We have a submesh, and then each submesh has two submeshes, and the submeshes have another set of meshes inside. So this way we can easily figure out how the whole thing is structured and then which level to use to target specific meshes, either the words or the whole lines and so on. Problem is, if your mesh is too complex, like it has too many shapes, then this won't work. So how to change it to temporarily to a count of 5 to be able to see how the whole thing is built. So we can see that we have one submesh, second one, and then the third ones contain the words themselves, but the submesh of level 2 contains the whole rows. So if I then select the start range at 2 and end range at 2, then as you can see, we are targeting words at a time. So if I go back to count of 100, and we don't need the Mesh Explorer, and as you can see, everything is working perfectly. The next step is to target only the words within this Falloff range. To do that, I just have to select Color Array, uncheck Auto Index, right click, add a value, select a value of 1, and then add a Falloff. And we're gonna use the same Falloff as before. So now if I just pin this color array, go back to our main color array and make sure the first one is linked to the text, and this is the highlight, and I can rename it. So now if I press play, as you can see, we have animation that's going to scroll on and highlight only a specific word once it gets within the range of the Falloff. So we are pretty much done. The last step is I'm going to create a highlight dot, and I'm going to use the highlight dot color as a fill, rename it as dot. Then I'm going to position it as a child of the position vector. Then change the values as so then we are at the exact spot as this vector, our vector null. And then finally I want to position this dot at this specific point where the whole Falloff happened, to kind of give it an extra highlight or design reinforcements of sort. So we can do that by simply adding a math node to the X position, pin it here, and if I take my duplicator, take the radius, drop it in the first one, then if I change the operation to subtract, so this way I can offset the position of this dot relative to the radius of our duplicator. So this dot is a little bit too big, so let's maybe change the radius to like 25, zero it out, and maybe add a tiny bit of offset. So now if I play this, then we've got animation as follows, and we are pretty much done. The best part of this setup is that no matter where I move the duplicator, the Falloff will still stay in the correct position, and you can easily adjust the radius, the number of data points, and the whole thing will populate and auto update. I hope this was useful and you learned something new. Thanks for watching.